Harrenhal did not sleep so much as hold its breath. The stones kept their own silence, old and scorched and bent into shapes like half-melted candles, and the courtyards gathered fog off the waters of the god's eye, until the air tasted like damp ash. When the wind climbed the blackened towers, it made a narrow music, a thin whistling that could be mistaken for voices if you let it. Arya never let it. She had learned to divide noise into parts. The wheeze of the kennelmaster's oldest hound from 3 doors away. The rasp of Wheeze's shoes before Wheeze's name was crossed from her mind. The scrape of a cockroach in the pantry's dark. The difference between a drunken laugh and a guard with a throat too dry. The difference between a man who would notice a cupbearer and a man who never would. By day she brought Lord Tywin Lannister his wine with hands that did not shake. She had learned where to stand at his elbow, so that the candlelight fell across the maps and letters at the angle he liked. She learned his smell, which was not like other men's, not sour with wine or salted like horse or stale with wool. He smelled of clean leather and scraped ink, and the sharp, almost bitter ghost of some herb he chewed in the afternoons, when the council stretched long. He had a way of lifting a finger that sent men twice his size to talking quieter. He did not laugh often, and when he did, it was not kindly. He listened. He made choices while other men made noises. By night, Arya spoke names to herself, until they lightened the tightness in her chest. And then she slept under the kitchen table, or in the corner, by the ovens where the heat rose through the stones and crept into her bones. She would wake with flour in her hair and the taste of smoke in her mouth. And in the quiet moment before eyes were rubbed and braids were tied, she would hold on to her father's voice as if it were a spar in cold water. The shape of it, the steadiness, the way it made things make sense. When the ovens were stoked, the cooks would pinch her ear and call her by the wrong name and remember their own children for a heartbeat, and then the day would begin again, with shouting and hunger. Lord Tywin's days were circled in ink. Men came in to say that a ford was lost, or a village burned, or a levy was late. He would draw a line, and the map would change, and men whose names she did not know would nod as if the world had always been like this and would never be otherwise. She watched their faces. Sir Adam Marbrand with his sunny hair and the habit of looking to the windows when he thought. Lord Lefford, who worried at the signet ring on his finger. Knights from the west with lion badges bright as a child's toy. And Riverlanders gone gray with road dust and care. She watched how they bent, how pride hid itself in the careful bow. She poured wine and counted which of them met her eyes as if she were something with a name. If Tywin saw her, he gave no sign. Yet she felt the weight of his attention sometimes, like sunlight moving to follow a man on a field. When she filled his cup, he held it out without looking, and his fingers did not brush hers, and the cup neither wobbled nor slopped. He knew where she would be before she did. He could not be surprised. That was what she told herself to keep her heart from running. He could not be surprised. That was what made the thought like a hot coal she could take up and put down and take up again. If it could be done, then no one would expect it. If it could be done, the world would shift on its own map. 3 names, Jaqen had promised. She had said 2, and then she had tried to say his, and he had smiled and made it into something else. She had not named Tywin Lannister because Jaqen would not have liked that game, and because something in her wanted to do this with her own hands, the way her father had said a man should. Blood for blood, with no one in between. If she did it, it would be her. If she failed, it would be her. She could feel the edge of it always, like the edge of her little sword had felt in her palm. The one they had taken. Needle was gone. The edge remained. The day it began, the lake threw up mist so thick, the air in the yard looked bruised. Men cursed their way through it. She carried 2 pitchers up the back stair and slipped along the gallery, where a faded tapestry showed a hunter with antlers on his head. She had learned the pattern of the guards, the way she had learned the creak in each stair. This one took his ease near the east embrasure and liked to scratch the scar under his beard. That one had a cough that came in 2s, not 3s. No one noticed a little girl walking like she belonged. She kept her head down and her mouth shut, and her mind fixed on the weight of the pitcher, the shape of a door, the particular smoothness of a certain stone she would touch with the side of her hand as she passed it. a charm against forgetting who she was. Inside his solar, the candles had been trimmed even before the day began to gray. The big table was set with a square of vellum-like skin, the river in blue, the roads in brown, small tokens carved like horses and towers. Tywin sat as if the iron chair had been made to measure him. Back straight, chin level, eyes on a letter that an old scribe laid before him, with hands that trembled not from fear but from age and long practice. The windows were open to the fog. It drifted in and made the room smell of wet stone. Arya stood against the wall on the shadow side, and poured when a cup went dry, and stepped to the table to blot an ink blot that had swelled like a bruise. Her hands were steady. Inside her chest, something small and taut watched the way his throat moved when he swallowed. He spoke of the Blackwater and of the shape of the king's army as if he were rearranging dishes on a shelf. Stannis Baratheon's name came up like a burr. A raven had come from Bitterbridge, another from King's Landing, where his dwarf son wrote with a hand like a nettle. The Tyrells were in it now, or might be. This lord would be flattered with this. That lady threatened with that. Robb Stark remained a problem that could be solved by numbers and the hunger of his men and the impatience of boys who called themselves king. The Freys were wax. Warm them, impress them. The Boltons were knives. Take care where you reach. Tywin's finger flicked a token, and it jumped to a new place on the map, as if it understood its master. Arya had thought the day would make her breath come short with terror. Instead, she felt an odd calm, as if she had been walking a long way, and had at last reached a road marker. She had passed in a dream. When the council broke, and men bowed, and the room emptied to the whispering fog, she took away the cups and set another pitcher on the sideboard. And that was when she saw it, not a weapon, not a vial, not the thing she had imagined again and again in the dark. A goblet with a hairline crack down one side that made the wine leak in the tiniest trickle when you spun it a certain way. She watched the drops gather. It was nothing. It was everything. The surety that even the things that looked whole contained weakness if you knew where to look and had the patience to wait. She did not act that day. She did not act the next. She carried out her little duties and let the pattern of the guards sink deeper into her bones. In the kitchens, she watched a butcher lay out liver and heart, and the color turned her stomach, and then steadied it. She stole a paring knife with a blade no longer than her palm and worked at its edge with a stone until it could cut a thought in two. She sewed a seam into her sleeve that would hold the knife flat against her arm. She learned the rope ladder down from the old rookery by climbing it with numb fingers until her hands knew each knot like a friend's face. She found out which lock on the postern door could be teased with a hook and which would not. Once she followed a rat into a crack in the masonry and came out with a mouth full of dust and the memory of a tunnel that went nowhere but might. On a different night, look like luck. She did not tell Gendry. She did not tell Hot Pie because Hot Pie would have cried. She did not tell Jaqen, though Jaqen would have smiled in the way that made the world tilt. She did not tell anyone at all. She spoke names at night until she could say Tywin Lannisters without her throat tightening. Then she stopped speaking names and rested in a silence so hard it rang. The night came down like a curtain. It smelled of cold water. Somewhere in the castle, a woman laughed and then clapped a hand over her mouth. The moon was a dull mark behind cloud. Arya took the stale heel of a loaf from the kitchen and chewed without tasting it, and tied a rag around her head to hold back her hair. She was good at walking the places where you were not supposed to be. It was a talent like whistling or balancing a tray when men jostled you. She went by the kennels, quiet, noses tucked under tails, through the narrow stair where two stones jutted far enough to put your feet sideways, along the gallery where the hunter with antlers watched her with his painted eyes. The paring knife lay flat against her wrist, warm from her skin. She had counted the men. 2 at the door to the solar, 1 bored enough to lean, 1 with his jaw set hard, another on the stair landing 2 turns down. A patrol that came and went in a sloppiness she could fit herself between. She waited in a shadow until the patrol had tracked its way toward the kitchens. She could smell onions and stewed bones on their clothes even from here. And then she came out into the gray light of the hall with her shoulders rounded and her tray held out in both hands. Boys were always carrying something. Men's eyes slid over them like water. "Wine for Lord Tywin," she said, and if her voice wavered she could not hear it for the beat in her ears. The jaw-set guard grunted without looking at her. The bored one took the tray and rapped on the door. Inside, a voice said, "Come." Tywin was alone. The candles made soft wells of light. He had taken off his armor and sat in his shirt with the sleeves rolled, a map under his hands, and the scribe's letter set aside with a weight of carved bone. He did not look up at once, and in that breath Arya saw the breadth of his back, the thickness of his wrists, the way age had not softened him. He was a leaver. He moved other things. "Leave it," he said, "and fetch the old man. We are not finished." The bored guard set down the tray. He did not linger. Men did not linger in Lord Tywin's presence unless they were asked to. Arya kept her eyes on the floor, and when the door closed, she let the pattern she had practiced come to life. 3 steps forward, 1 to the side where the candle threw the smallest shadow on the wall, her right hand lifting to smooth her hair as her left slid the knife from the seam. She imagined her father's hands. She imagined his look when he wanted you to think about where you put your feet. She imagined the curve of a deer's neck as a hunter drew a knife under it quick and clean. No words. Words were always late to the thing itself. He did look up then. Of course he did. She had not truly expected otherwise. His eyes took her in the way they took in any piece of the room that might matter. They did not widen. They did not soften. They moved from her face to her hands, to the tray to her sleeve, as if making a list. And then he set down the little bone weight and wiped a smudge of ink from his thumb with the corner of a cloth. "What is your name?" he said in a way that was not a question, so much as the beginning of some practical arrangement. She moved, not at his voice but through it, because to wait would be to let it unravel her. The knife came up from the shadow of her sleeve like a fish in a stream curving to meet the sun. She put herself where she had no right to be, inside his arm, closer than a cupbearer. Close enough to smell the herb he chewed and the warmth under its bitterness. Close enough to see that there was a single white hair at his temple among the gold. She drove the little blade across the place under his ear where the pulse beat, where a man's neck narrowed before it met the shoulder. It did not go in as easily as she had imagined. He moved. Of course he moved. He was faster than any old lord had a right to be. Bone and sinew turned under her hand, and the blade struck and skated, and struck again. He surged up from the chair, and the table jarred, and the ink pot tipped and black ran out like a spreading night. His hand caught her wrist hard enough to leave a bruise like fingers would be a part of her from now on. His other hand went to the knife that he did not wear, because why would he wear it in his own soul alone? He had no knife. He had a body and a will like iron, and he used them. Arya twisted. The paring knife was small. It was made to pare fruit, not carve power. She went where the small knife wanted to go, and not where a sword would have. The second strike found softness, the corner of a mouth, the flesh by the jaw hinge. His breath came out in a sound that was not a word. His grip tightened and then slipped, slick with something that warmed and smelled of salt and copper. She felt it on her hands and did not let the feel make a story. She did not let it be anything but what it was. She put the blade where she had practiced putting it 100 times in air. Under, not across. In, not aside. It found the place. A man is not a fortress. He is doors and corridors and a roof you can set fire to if you know how. For a heartbeat, she believed she was outside her body watching herself do this. Then her breath came back in a ragged draw and brought her down into the room where a great lord staggered and put a hand on the table to steady himself and smeared ink and blood into a pattern like a raven's wing. He made a sound. She could not decide if it was a word or a laugh or the beginning of one of those looks that ended men's voices. She stumbled backward. The knife fell. It hit wood and bounded, and she caught it with a noise of metal on skin that would make a scar she would remember later when the spring came and the wolves sang. The door. There would be the door. He was not dead. He would not be dead for moments yet. That would draw out like rope. The human body clings to itself, her father had said once after a hunt when they had bled a deer, and he had made her look. The human body wants to go on. Lord Tywin's did, with a fury that had made houses bend. He took one step, and then another, and the world moved around him as if in respect. He reached for her again, and missed her sleeve by 2 fingers' width. A thread of red made uncertain handwriting down his throat and into his shirt. His lips were set, as if somewhere there was a thing he would not give up, and refusing would keep it. He turned, as if to call out, as if to pick up a bell that would strike the hall like a hammer. He crashed into the chair, and the chair tipped, and the map slid. The tokens jumped, and a little wooden horse toppled and rolled to Arya's foot. She remembered it later. The horse. The knock came then. A hard, respectful rap. "My lord," the board guard said, a question rising like smoke. Arya did not answer. Tywin did not answer. His hand closed over the table's edge, opened, closed again. His eyes met hers. There was something there. Not pleading, not even anger. Calculation, perhaps, stripped now of all but the thinnest thread. She recognized it because she had seen it in the mirror of water in the kitchens, when her face had set itself into the shape it wore when she whispered names. He sank. The noise he made was not like the noise a man makes in battle. It was as if the air had been punched out of the room. He slid to the floor, and the candles guttered at the breath of it. In the same instant, Arya was moving. She snatched at the spilled ink pot and flung it against the door, where it broke with a sharp crack and a spreading black. The guard cursed, startled. She was at the window, but the drop to the yard would break her legs. The secret she had found had not been a window. It had been that the section of wainscoting by the little cupboard had a cunning latch. Her fingers found it in the dark, where they had found it 100 times in the light of her mind. The latch slid with a sound neat as a word spelled right. She slipped through. Inside the wall, the air was cold and smelled of rat and old stone. She pulled the panel back into place behind her with the strength of the last name on her list, and she crouched and held herself happy to be small. A man's weight thudded against the door on the other side, and another voice called. And then the door was forced, and men came into the room, with a rush that pushed air into the space, where she crouched and made the candlelight stripe through a thin line at the bottom of the panel. She heard the sudden silence, the way all sound collapses when the world changes very fast. Someone swore and then stopped, as if the word itself had grown teeth. She heard her own breath far louder than theirs, and pressed her mouth with the back of her hand, until spots danced behind her eyes. "Fetch the maester." A voice tried to be calm and failed. "Fetch everyone." Another voice corrected, hard and practical. "Close the gates." "Who?" The word came out of someone who could not keep it in. Who did this? Her heart wanted to answer. She did not let it. She turned herself sideways and slid along the narrow dark, counting paces by touch and the memory of splinters. The little run inside the walls dog-legged twice and then dropped to the low space under the stairs. She had gone this way with a candle end and a bit of tallow on 2 stolen nights, and counted the stones under her fingers like prayers. When she reached the end, she put her ear to the panel there and listened. On the other side, the stair landing. A guard with shoes that pinched. Another with the cough. She waited. The world roared as if she were inside a seashell and the sea were coming in. She waited until the cough came, and it came in 2s. She slid the panel with the knife's tip and put her eye to the crack. The men had their heads turned toward the solar, toward the shouting, toward the thing that had already begun to roll through the castle and out into the camps like thunder that makes men sit up, wondering whose god is angrier. She was a shadow when she came out. She kept close to stone. She did not run. Running is a shout. She moved with the pace of someone late for a sensible, permitted errand. She took the stair that went down, not up. She put the knife back into her sleeve, because a knife in a hand is a confession. She turned corners. She became house. She became steam rising off dishwater. She pushed into the narrow passage by the larders and breathed the warm, fatty air like protection. Hot pie was there, flour on his cheek, eyes like 2 moons. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, which was so like him Arya nearly laughed. "We have to go," Arya said. Her voice was steady because she had already used all the shaking she was allowed for the night. "Fine, Gendry. Meet me at the old rookery. Now." "No?" He glanced toward the door where the shouting had begun to be a sort of order. Bells answered bells. "No, it's now." She held his gaze until he swallowed and nodded, and put down the dough as if it were a child he would come back for. The old rookery had lost its birds long before the dragons. Its ladders were 2 ropes and a memory. She put her weight on the knots as if on the bones of an old friend. The fog had thickened until the yard below was only a notion. Far off, men were mounting in a hurry. Bridle bits clinked like teeth in a cold head. She climbed. At the top, the roof sagged but held, and from there the whole shape of Harrenhal was a beast curled around itself, all burned ridges and hollows gathering mist. She could see, in the patchy way one sees through fog, torches moving like fireflies, and the run of men along the wall like ants pressed to their line by some new smell. She could not see the room where she had been a moment ago. She did not try. She put her hand on the stone and let the cold into her palm until her skin went numb. He should go north with her. Gendry should. They could take the river, steal a boat, let the current choose for them until it chose a reed bed to hide in. She could wait in a willow skirt and listen for hooves and men that said the wrong names for the same things because they were from too far away and did not know this grass from that. She could find the road that became the path, that became the old track her father had told her about once on a long ride when the world was all distance and she had not yet known it would narrow to a list you whispered in the dark. Gendry's head came up through the hole, then his shoulders, his arms already stripped to muscle. Hot Pie panted behind him. Gendry's eyes were trying to ask everything at once. "What's happening?" he hissed. Arya glanced over the wall. A squad ran across the yard with a purpose that had an edge. "Something has happened," she said. She did not say what. It felt like an object she could not bring into the light without making it too real. "We go down the ropes, then the postern by the ash heap, then the brush and the ditch, then the path." "Hey, what path?" "The one that looks like a bad idea." She said, and then she found herself grinning with a fierceness that surprised her. "If you don't come, don't come. I'm not waiting." Gendry's jaw worked. He nodded once. Hard. A smith's nod to a task begun. "I'm coming." He reached for Hot Pie and hauled him by the collar when he saw Hot Pie's hands shaking too badly for knots. "You're coming too." "I didn't say I wasn't," Hot Pie said, very offended, and then swallowed. They went down into fog. The rope burned Arya's palms. Below, the yard stones were wet, and a boot slipped on them would make a noise that would carry. They went soft. They kept shadows. They made themselves part of the edges of things. Near the ash heap, the gate was watched by a man whose thoughts were not at the postern, but up the wall where horns were being blown and voices were being tested against fear. Arya felt the shape of his breath as he turned his head. She went when his lungs were empty, on the edge of the inhale when the world draws itself in. They passed so close she could have touched the roughness of his glove with her teeth. The ditch gave them back to the world on the far side of the palisade, where the ground went away into bramble and scrub, and then, farther on, into damp open ground, where reeds said, yes, yes, yes to the smallest wind. They crouched until their legs trembled. Torches bit at the fog above the wall like foxes wanting in. A bell that had been sleeping for half a year woke angry. Arya felt the sound in her teeth. "What did you do?" Gendry said, not like a question for curiosity, but like one a smith asks a bar of iron that has cooled too quickly. She let the breath out of her. "I did one thing," she said. She could not say the name. There would be time later to decide if the name made it real again, or if it would only make it worse. If they never said it, it would still be true. Hot Pie made a small sound at the back of his throat. "We're dead," he said. "We're dead men walking. Dead men crawling. Dead, dead, dead." Gendry clapped a hand over his mouth and pressed him down into the bramble, until Hot Pie's eyes watered. "Not dead if you stop saying so." "Not dead," Arya said, and put her hand flat on the earth, until she felt the cold ground speak the truth of it. "Not if we keep moving. The road will be watched. The river won't. It's the God's eye." Hot Pie whispered against Gendry's palm. "They say it's bottomless." "Then it will swallow a lot of trouble," Arya said. They went south by west, not because Arya chose it, but because the ground made the choice. They kept the lights of Harrenhal at their backs like a storm you have outrun and do not dare turn to measure. The reeds were thick, and the paths between them were slick and deceptive. And twice Hot Pie went hip-deep in black water and had to be hauled by the collar like a sack. Gendry did it with a long breath that said later the ache would come. The air over the marsh had a skin of its own. Frogs spoke into it. Once a bird rose up so close from underfoot that Arya's heart leapt with it, and the sound of its wings was like a hand clapping cloth. When they had gone far enough that the noise of the bells had become a thought rather than a sound, they huddled in the lee of a tuft of thorn. Gendry tore a strip from his shirt and bound Arya's hand where the knife had nicked her. He did not look at her for long. Hot Pie leaned his head on his knees and breathed as if he were drinking his breath in gulps. Arya let the numbness that had held her loosen. It hurt. Thought. The hurt came in waves that were not just in her body. She pressed her forehead to the ground and saw, very clearly, Tywin Lannister's eyes, the way they had steadied even as something essential in him failed. She had seen men die in the street when the gold cloaks cut them down. This had not been that. This had been the toppling of a thing, like sending a table over, like pushing a statue. This had been gravity. Will they? Hot Pie swallowed the rest of the sentence. They will do something, Arya said. Her voice sounded older than she felt. They will do many somethings. They will pull on ropes and see what moves. They will kick the dog to make it bark and see what runs. They will not find us if we do not make ourselves into a thing that can be found. How do we do that? Gendry asked, practical as a hammer. We are small, she said. We become smaller. We do not shout inside our heads. We do not think our names out loud. We are 3 bits of dark in larger dark. Gendry nodded once. Hot Pie tried to nod and made a noise instead. Arya thought of her father's hands again and found that it steadied her. The back of her tongue tasted like iron. Behind them, Harrenhal reorganized itself. Men ran to horses that did not understand their master's urgency and laid their ears back with annoyance. Ravens lifted and were coaxed down again as messages were written that mixed blood and ink on the scribe's table. A boy was sent to find Lord Tywin's brother and could not think how to shape the words when he found him. Names were spoken that had not been spoken with doubt before. The campfires of 5,000 men took on a different kind of light, the kind the eye cannot see, but the mind feels in the spine. The rumor reached the outmost centuries as a question that kept turning itself over like a coin to prove its truth. It crossed the drawbridge like wind. It leapt the ditch. It ran along the road to the villages where mothers kept children close when horsemen passed. It was the kind of thing that does not happen, and yet it had. In a canvas tent, staked among the wagons, Sir Adam Marbrand stood very still with a letter in his hand and thought about the way a horse that had carried you for years could misstep if you leaned too hard on it in a moment of fear. He went out and put his face into the cold, and the fog took his breath away for the space of a heartbeat. And in that space he decided whom he would listen to, and whom he would not. He gave 3 orders in a voice that brooked no argument, and then stood with his hands behind his back, as if he were watching a hunt he would not join. He thought of the boy king in King's Landing, and of the dwarf with the clever mouth, and of the man who had kept them all from tumbling into their own folly with nothing but a look, and the inevitable weight of what he meant. He did not think of grief. He would drink to grief later in his own time. For now there was the next step, and the step after that, and the shape of the board when you took away its heaviest piece. In the solar, a maester with hair like old snow pressed linen to a throat where the blood had slowed, and then stopped. He had done it for men he had liked, and for men he had not liked. He had never done it for a man who had made him forget what liking was for. He did not weep. He sent for wax and a seal. He looked at the map and read in the smears a story he was too tired to tell. He thought, not for the first time, that the castle itself would be pleased. Arya and Gendry and Hot Pie slept in the reeds by turns, curled around nothing, their bodies trying to learn the shape of the ground. When she slept, Arya dreamed of the paring knife, small and sure, swimming through water black as ink. She woke to the sound of a boat, moving very softly through the channels. A punt pushed by a man, with shoulders wider than he needed. He wore a cap that had once been red. He pretended not to see them until he had to, and then he looked away again, which was a kind of kindness. "We can pay," Arya said. She had nothing to back the words. She had stolen the knife. She had not thought to steal coin. "Pay when you are whoever you are trying to be," the man said, and did not smile. He used his pole to take the boat into a track through the reeds that Arya would not have seen from any angle but the one the man knew. The boat went like a thought you were careful not to have loudly. The water lapped at the wood with small, absolute hands. They went that way for the better part of a morning, if it could be called morning under the fog that made the sky seem only a lighter sort of gray. Little fish nosed at the surface. Once, farther out toward the lake's true body, something larger turned, and the ripple ran away toward the island with its ring of trees like a pupil. The man spat into the water and made a sign with his hand that had more to do with old stories than with any new order wrought by lords. "Harrenhal's weeping," he said at last, as if continuing a conversation no one had quite begun. "Or the men on it are." Same sound. "No one is weeping," Arya said. The words came out before she could stop them. She did not know why she was angry at the thought, only that she was. The man did not argue. "You coming from there?" "We are going anywhere that is not there," Gendry said. "North if we can, or west." He put a hand on his knee to keep it from bouncing. The effort was visible. "West is lions," the man said softly. "North is wolves, east is mud. South is men with boats who ask you who your lord is and are offended by the answer." "We have a lord," Arya said. She did not know whether she was lying. She thought of Robb. She thought of Winterfell. She thought of a weirwood face that had always seemed carved in an emotion she could not name. "He doesn't know where we are is all." "Best lords don't," the man said, and turned the pole with a twist that sent the boat sliding into a new channel where the reeds grew thin and grass began. And then a strip of higher ground showed itself, running along the water like a vein. He set them down there. "You didn't see me," he said, "because some kindnesses need to be protected by lies." "We didn't see you," Arya repeated. She meant it with more weight than he could possibly understand. She stepped onto the hummocked ground and felt it take her weight like a careful friend. The fog thinned by degrees and became air. They moved again. Days and the parts of days ordered themselves around hunger and caution. They learned to move at the edge of fields and under the skirts of trees. They learned to lie flat when riders came and to keep their breath slow. The land taught them how to make a fire that left no smoke and when not to make one at all. They ate what they could steal and what the hedges offered. The world took the cut of them as three pieces that did not yet fit together. News travels differently from people. It moves without feet and backwards sometimes, and has a way of appearing before you as if it had been waiting. It reached them in a shepherd's mutter, in a woman's curse, in the way a gate was barred at dusk where it had not been the day before. It had many mouths. The Lannister lord at Harrenhal was dead as any man. He had been cut like meat. He had been poisoned by a sour maid. He had choked on ink. He had been killed by his dwarf son who had flown on a crow from King's Landing to do it. He had been found with a wolf's head on his chest. He had been found with a crown. Each teller was sure. Each shook their head in a way that meant the world had been larger in their mind than it now seemed on their road. One night, by luck, or because the world wanted a shape to make sense of itself, Arya found Jaqen H'ghar sitting on a log by a small fire that dared the open only so far as to warm his hands. The coin he had given her once had the dull gleam of something not quite gold when he turned it under his fingers. He looked up as if she had been expected as surely as a moon is. "Little wolf," he said in that careful music of his speech. "A certain castle has had its supper. The smile that lived in his voice showed itself, and then went away. "You smell of the thing after." She sat across from him. Her hands were cold enough that she could feel the burn of their return at the fire. "You knew," she said, though it was not really a question. "A man knows the change in the air when a name is answered," Jaqen said. A man did not hear that name said, but the god a man serves has long ears. "You didn't want me to do it," Arya said, and was surprised to hear the accusation come out like a tired child's. "You wanted me to say it, and you would have done it, neat as a word." "I didn't want that." She watched his face as she spoke, and saw nothing she could use. Jaqen cocked his head. Wanting and choosing her cousins. A man respects blood that makes its own path. His eyes went to her sleeve, where the seam had been resewn. A neat work for a child. "It wasn't neat," she said. The memory of the ink, the stagger, the way his hand had caught her wrist and almost made her into one of his pieces, came back sharp. It was wrong, and it worked. "Most right things have a little wrong under them," Jaqen said. "Like straw under a thatch, keeps the roof breathing." She did not know what to do with that. Men are going to die because of it. Men were already dying because of him, Jaqen said. Which was too easy, and Arya scowled. "Are you going to take me to Braavos?" she said abruptly. Because the coin in his hand had tolled, in her mind, a bell from a city she had never seen. "A man will take you where your feet wish to go," he said, "and where your names point. North." He turned the coin on his knuckles until it disappeared in his palm, and then it was between his fingers again. "Or to a place where names have different weight." "My brother is North," Arya said. "My mother, or they were." It nearly took her voice. "I am going to them." Jaqen nodded, as if she had told him water was wet. "Then a man will teach you one thing to help you honor that road." He lifted a hand and took her wrist with the lightest of grips in the place where Lord Tywin's fingers had bruised her, and she did not pull away. He turned her arm so that the seam lay up. "You cut from here," he said softly. "Not across. You enter where bone is a hinge, not a wall. You know this now. Learn also to put the knife down. The god a man serves does not hunger only for death. He is also sated by the moment a life submits to a different shape." "I am not going to serve your god," Arya said stubbornly. "A man did not ask you to," Jaqen said, smiling in a way that made the night itself seem pleased to have learned a trick. He stood. "A man will walk a little while with your wind. Then a man will be gone." He inclined his head toward Gendry, who had been listening with the careful stillness of someone at a forge, waiting for the temper to show, and toward Hot Pie, who had fallen asleep with his mouth open and a crumb stuck to his lip. "They are not all yours to carry," he said, "but they are yours for now. That is weight enough." He gave her the coin. The metal was warmer than the night. She closed her hand around it and felt the edges press into her lines like a mark you could carry, without anyone seeing until you wanted them to. "If I say the words, in the right place you will be answered," he said. "In the wrong place you may be answered also, but by the wrong things." He walked away then, into the fog, and for a moment he seemed to be stepping into the lake itself. And then he was gone between two uncertain shrubs that made a gate. The fire snapped once in his wake, and then settled. Arya sat a while and listened to Gendry breathing, to Hot Pie muttering nonsense about pies, in a place that had no oven. She turned the coin in her hand until it caught no light. She thought of Lord Tywin Lannister's eyes, and of how the pattern of a room changes when a chair is empty. She thought of her father's voice and of Rob's, which she barely remembered. She thought of the map with its smear of ink and blood, and of the little wooden horse that had rolled to her foot, and of how the things men move with their fingers move men in return. In King's Landing, a boy king would kick the dog, and the dog would bite someone who did not deserve it. In the West, a castle would lower banners half a staff and raise them again because the world required the appearance of unbroken lines. In the Riverlands, men would take off lion badges and put them on again and discover that the metal had grown heavier overnight. Bullies would be braver and cowards would be cleverer. And somewhere, a man with less courage than he needed would decide he had enough because he had to. Choices would go spidering out across the map, from the point where blood had met ink. Arya closed her hand until the coin pressed pain into her palm. She stood, because the night was not a place to live in. They would go on in the morning along the edge of the lake until it yielded them to the roads again. North could be a dozen lies and one truth. She would find the truth because she would not stop until it let itself be found. The fog lifted its veil a little, and the stars beyond it made a dim, stubborn arch. Somewhere far off, a wolf called, and another answered, and the sound went down into her bones and made a room there. She breathed into it until it felt bigger. She did not say any names. She did not need to. She lay down with her head on her arm and felt the night lay its hand over her the way her father had done when she was small, his palm covering her hair as if to tell it to be still. When she slept, she dreamed of a hall of burned stone, and of the sound ink makes when it hits a door, and of a map that could be remade by a girl who had once been taught to hold a blade straight and had never forgotten. At dawn, the reeds were hung with pearls. The lake lay gray and deceptive, its surface a flat lie. A fisherman pushed his boat out and did not look toward the shore because the day asked other things of him. Arya rubbed the sleep from her eyes and shook Hot Pie's shoulder and tapped Gendry's boot with her toe. Gendry woke as if he had never closed his eyes. Hot Pie groaned. "We have to move," she said. "We have to keep moving." "Toward?" Gendry asked, because it was his nature to fit a task into a forge. "Toward more of the same," Arya said. It made him snort in a way that felt almost like laughter. She shouldered the world and felt it settle. The bruise around her wrist had come up dark. It would be the color of evening for days. She pulled the sleeve down. They put the lake behind them as best they could, though you can never really put a lake behind you. Water has a way of standing where it is while you go somewhere else, and discovering a way to be under your feet anyway. They found a track that tried at being a road, and failed and followed it past a tangle of willow, and into a copse where a woman with a spindle stared at them with no welcome and no malice. They passed a cart with one wheel cracked where a man had braced it with a stick, and his curse had become a prayer, and then a habit. They did not ask for bread. They did not put their backs to any wall that had only one door and a window too small to go through. They learned how to look at a place and judge where the danger would come from, if it came, and how to stand so that it would have to take an extra breath before reaching them. The land changed in the way that land does when you are paying attention. Gently, and then all at once. The marsh gave way to firmer fields. The hedges were thicker. The trees had been shaped by hands that knew them for years. There were more sheep and fewer frogs. The air dried out and carried dust again instead of damp. Somewhere close a smith struck iron and drew it out of itself. And Gendry's head turned at the sound like a hound's at a whistle. He looked, for a long time, younger, and then older. And then he looked like himself. "They'll ride," he said. "They'll ride as if the ground owed them speed. They will ride down other roads than ours," Arya said. She made herself sound certain. She had watched certainty in another's mouth. She could borrow its shape for her own. A rider did come toward evening, not one of theirs, not one of any that she knew. He wore no badge, and had a face like bread left too long in the oven. He looked at them as if they were poor, which they were, and therefore not worth what trouble they would be. He told them, unasked, that a great lord had been killed, and the world was about to change into something he would not like. He told them to stay off the main road because there was going to be anger on it, and anger liked a wide path. "Thank you," Arya said, because her father had taught her manners did not cost. When the rider had gone, she said, "We will do as he says." Hot Pie peered up the way the rider had come. "Do you think," he began, and stopped. "I think the bread is going to be dear," Gendry said, which had a kind of bitter beauty, and Hot Pie, being Hot Pie, nodded grimly as if a great truth had been spoken. That night, they slept in a hayrick that smelled like summer had been caught and saved. Arya lay awake a long time and listened to the mice make their language in the straw. She thought of the way Lord Tywin had steadied even as he fell. She thought of the way some men would call that courage, and some would call it nothing but body, and she did not know which she believed. She thought of her list and of how it had been changed by what her hands had done. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel guilt. She felt herself, far south, A letter was put into a hand that would shake the world with it. Far west, a lord drew down his mouth and became what he had been training himself to be for years. Second, and now first. Far north, crows took wing from a dead tree that had seen so much it did not bother to be impressed by one more man's new title. Somewhere, a woman who had expected a visit that would bind her to the lions received instead a raven with black wax, and read the line that made her sharp eyes narrow in thought. Somewhere else, a boy who would have died did not, because a patrol was called home. Somewhere another boy died, because a patrol went out twice as far and twice as hard. This is how the world measures such acts. Not in a single scale, but in 1,000 hidden balances that no one hand can see. In the morning, before the sun had come to terms with the day, Arya woke with a start from a dream in which the map on the table had been flesh, and the knife had been a quill, and ink had been the way the world learned to spell itself again. She sat up and rubbed her face and shook straw from her hair. Gendry was already awake, looking toward the east. Hot Pie snored softly, the sound like a kitten mispurring. Somewhere a rooster told a lie about being brave. "We go," Arya said. "North," Gendry said. "North," she said, and the word was both a promise and a dare. They shouldered what they had, a crust of bread gone hard, a water skin that would need refilling by midday, the paring knife, a coin that was not a coin, and the understanding that the thing they had done had made a hole in the world, and it would take time to learn how the edges of that hole would crumble or harden. Arya did not look back the way one does at a city left behind because she did not want to make the shape again in her mind. She looked ahead and saw only road and hedge and the particular silver of morning. She thought of wolves again, and the thought did not frighten her. A wolf does not ask the wood if it may pass. It passes. They stepped out of the hay and into the day that was waiting, and the day took them in with no sign that it noticed anything at all had changed, which is how days are. Only later, when they lay down again, would they find the shape of what they had begun. For now there were steps to count and a way to keep to the shallow ditches, when riders came and the frequent work of beating hunger and thirst into being merely companions. For now there was breathing and the simple fact of still being allowed to do it. By midday the sun had burned the fog off the fields, and the sky was a clean, hard blue. A line of ants crossed the path with the confidence of creatures whose maps do not need to change because a lord has died. Arya stood for a moment and watched them carry pieces of something too heavy for one. She let herself smile. She adjusted the seam where the knife lay so it would not chafe. She took 3 more steps and then a 4th. The wind came up and moved the hedge like a mother's hand smoothing hair. And somewhere under it a lark attempted courage. The road rose, and on the rise she turned enough to see just a sliver of the water in the far distance catching the light, as if it had set a small fire there for its own amusement. She did not think of Harrenhal. She thought of winter and of a hall with stone walls, and of a bench by a fire where a girl could sit, with her feet tucked up, and listen to a voice she missed more than she could say. She set her face toward it. All calm. The road that tried to be a road bent around a stand of young oaks and broke apart where cart wheels had churned it, while the ground was soft and never come back to mend it. The 3 of them picked their way along the firmer ruts, stepping from tuft to tuft, as if crossing a stream you could not quite see. Arya made herself hear the small things. The creak of leather when Gendry shifted the strap of the water skin on his shoulder, the hiss of dry leaves against Hot Pie's boots as he dragged his feet whenever his courage wavered. The way wind sometimes came like a secret that wanted to be told and sometimes like a hand that pushed without asking. When she let her thoughts go wider, the world tried to speak at once. The idea of her brother like a fire too far to warm you, but bright enough to set shadows moving. The way a man's life ends and makes a hole that other things rush to fill. By noon the hedges were trimmed close, and the ditches took their angles neatly, as if someone had come along with a straightedge and set the land to rights. They came upon a pair of women cutting willow withies and binding them with their skirts, their hands quick and sure, and their eyes measuring the 3 strangers without hurry. Arya lifted a hand. The taller woman did not wave back. She sucked her teeth softly as if tasting the weather. "Road's bad with riders," she said. "Best you take the sheep's ways." "Which are the sheep's ways?" Gendry asked, not trying to be clever. Where the ground rises, stay on it. Where it dips, go round, the woman said, and snorted at her own wisdom, which was not much but had kept her alive to her years. There's talk of lions with their tails tucked. Talk of a thing done that couldn't be done. Talk's cheap and trouble's dear. Hot Pie made a small sound that could have been a laugh if he'd remembered to put shape to it. Arya kept her face still. Thank you, she said, and meant it. The woman's eyes softened, then hardened again, the way water can seem to open and then close over a fish without leaving a sign. They followed the sheep's ways and were rewarded by a view down into a shallow valley where the main road ran like a scar and a tail of dust moved along it. Cavalry, Arya thought, by the way the dust gusted in little bursts where hooves struck and then settled. The rider's banner was a red smear through the air. She did not dare try to make it into a lion. And yet her blood knew it as a lion before her mind told her. The column moved with purpose and clatter, and the kind of uneven confidence men put on when they have to go fast and want to look as if they meant to. Gendry crouched beside her and counted the companies under his breath, not for number but to steady his hands. They're hurrying, he said. They're late, Arya said, and her throat closed on the last word as if it were too big a thing to say in a voice. They waited until the dust had gone from the air like thought gone from a tired head. Then they went on, keeping the higher ground and the hedges between them and anything that might be watching the road for something to stop. By evening they found a farmhouse with its doors barred, and the yard swept clean of everything that would tell strangers who lived there. Smoke came thin from the hole in the roof. A dog inside made the sound of a dog that did not want to be noticed. Arya tapped the gate with her knuckles. There was a long silence, and then a small girl's voice said, "Go away." It was not frightened. It was already tired of being brave. "We were going to," Arya said. "We only wanted to know which way to the river." "Down," the voice said. "Everything's down if you go far enough." Hot Pie opened his mouth to say something about the nature of rivers, and Arya touched his sleeve to stop him. "Thank you," she said again to the wood, and they slept that night in a copse where the ground had sagged, making a cradle that smelled of old leaves and mice. Gendry kept first watch, then Arya. Hot Pie's watch dissolved into a doze with his chin falling on his chest and startling him awake so many times that by morning he looked like a man who had fought a battle with sleep and come off worse. They found the trident on the third day, not by sight at first, but by sound, the particular talk of water that has a place to go and intends to go there whether men approve or not. The inn that kept the ford there had a signboard with a man kneeling before a crowned shadow, the paint flaking. A woman hung shirts along a rope and pretended not to look at them as they came up. The ford ran shallow, lapped brown and steady around stones placed by hands for carts to choose. A man on a stool near the door played a tune on a reed pipe that could have been an old song, or his own breath made tuneful by practice. The inn looked as if it had seen 10 armies go by and had learned to be furniture, rather than a thing to be chosen by one side or the other. Inside it smelled of onion and ale and damp wool. A fat man with a bald pate rubbed a cloth along a table with the vigor of someone trying to rub the world out. He set a bowl for them with a clang that said if he had to feed travelers, he would do it as if polishing something instead. Gendry put down 2 coppers produced from a place he had not told them he had, and kept his eyes on the bowl, as if that made the exchange cleaner. Arya held her spoon and did not bring it to her mouth until she had counted the men in the room and the places a man could go if he had to go very quickly. At the far table, under a shutter that let in a strip of light like a blade, 2 bowmen in patched cloaks sat with their backs to the wall. One had hair the color of wheat left too long. The other wore a yellow hood that made his nose look redder. Their clothes had no badge, but their eyes were quick and unenthusiastic at once, the way of men who knew how to be careful without making a show of it. The yellow-hooded man smiled at the fat innkeep, in a way that said they had been swapping small kindnesses for a while now. He tipped his bench forward on 2 legs and let it swing back again, not because he was nervous, but because it amused him to make furniture do what it didn't want to. A man in a travel-stained cloak came in from the ford, and everyone looked at him as if they were looking at the weather. He stamped mud from his boots and put a hand down his shirt to scratch his chest, as if to show he had nothing to hide. "Riders ahead and behind," he said to the room, "and a tail to keep pace with them. They say the lord at Harrenhal is dead." The fat innkeep made a noise with his mouth that could have been sympathy or indigestion. The yellow-hooded man made a snorting sound and said, "Which lord? I've had as many as fleas on a hound and all of them bite. The one who was lord of everything without having to be called king?" The traveler said. The room drew in, not to hear better but to lean away from what the words might do when they landed. "Cut like a pig," they say. Others say poisoned like a rat. Others say a witch told him a word, and he fell over like a tree. Whatever it was, it worked. Arya kept her eyes on her soup. The fat keep said, "Words are cheap," but his hand went to wipe a spot on the same clean table, as if the spot had appeared of its own accord just now. "Not his," said one of the bowmen, the wheat-haired, without looking up. "Not ever." The traveler sniffed. "Cheap enough now." He took a long swallow of ale and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "There'll be lions prowling with no one to tell them which deer." The inn held its breath and then let it go. The sound of the river outside filled the space the talk left. The yellow-hooded man tilted on his bench again and said, "Half to the room and half to his friend." Always said, "Cleave ahead and you get pieces. Some drowning, some floating, some going to shore to pretend they've been land all along." "Stop playing with your bench," the wheat-haired man said mildly. "You'll spill someone's drink, and then we'll have to fight, and you'll pretend to be sorry." The Yellowhood smiled to himself. Arya felt their attention on her once or twice, the way skilled men notice anything that might be interesting later. She noticed them back in a way that did not announce itself. When she rose to go, the Yellowhood turned toward her not to stop her. But because whatever game he played, he liked to look at all the pieces on the board. Outside, a boy of 8, with a stick, pretended to be a knight, and chopped at the reeds with a seriousness that would have done for a much harder task. A woman with a wimple sold a string of dried fish to a man who took each fish in his hand first, as if trying to remember their names. Gendry squinted at the ford. "We go across." "Not yet," Arya said. The nearer she drew to the water, the more her mind showed her the shape of a horse, falling with a man under it. The swirl and suck where mud tried to keep what it had been given. She shook her head as if to shake water from her ears. Downstream. There may be a shallower place, or one with fewer eyes. Hot Pie took a last look at the inn, where steam had begun to flower from a fresh pot, and sighed in the way men sigh when they believe themselves to have been too harshly treated by fate. "If we're going to die," he said, "I'd sooner do it with something in my stomach." "We're not going to die," Arya said, and kept her feet moving because that made it more true. They followed the river's bend and found a flat where the banks eased, and other feet had made a pattern of crossing. Prints of hooves and boots and paws and bare toes. All the languages of people and things that had needed to be on the other side. The water took them up to the knees and pushed, and the stones rolled underfoot, mean and sure. Gendry went first, setting his feet and holding out his hand back to Arya. Not to carry her but to make a bridge if she slipped. Hot Pie came last, his breath going fast, his eyes on the other bank as if a promise had been made to him there, and he could command it by looking. They came out with wet breeches, and the thrill in the chest that comes after you do a thing the water did not want you to do. Arya squeezed water out of her sleeve and wrung the seam where the knife lay so it would not chafe. They kept on, making for the tree line on the far side of the flats, where the land rose in a low ridge that would keep them from being seen by anyone who owned a better road. The day drew itself out. The light grew the grain of long afternoon. Birds went about their business. 2 crows held a conversation that sounded like 2 old men arguing about something small. When they came to a hollow with a bowl of roots like a table, Arya said, "Well, eat here," and Hot Pie nodded like a man who had been saved from a dark fate by the intervention of a practical god. He produced the last of their bread and some onions, and set about making them into something with a name. Gendry had climbed a little to stand where he could see back toward the ford. He stood very still. Arya joined him. On the far road they had left behind, a new stain of dust moved east like a stray storm. Banners pricked at it like thorns. The line of riders had a shape, not the ragged hunger of marauders, nor the deliberate patience of a baggage train. It was a body with a spine. "More of them," Gendry said, and there was no heat in it, only the acknowledgement of weather. "They're going to the city." "They're going because of the thing I did," Arya said. She did not take pride. She did not shrink. She stood in the fact as if it were a cold stream. Gendry looked at her sidelong. "Or they'd have gone anyway, and now they're hurrying," he said. "Hurry can make a man clumsy. We'll see whose hurry it is." They did not speak more of it. There was much to do, and no time to do it slowly. They ate onions that made their eyes water in a clean way, and bread that had gone hard but gave willingly when warmed on a flat rock. When the sun had decided the day could do without it, they moved again, taking the sheep's ways through dusk until the night took the color from everything and gave them back shapes instead. They slept in turns, and for the first time since the Lake Arya did not dream of ink. She dreamed of snow, of the smell of it like new iron and old stone, and of a voice telling her the names of trees in winter. In King's Landing, the raven came down like a piece of the sky deciding to change sides. It struck the sill hard with its feet, and the boy who had been given the watch for that hour nearly let it go again in his panic, clumsy with sleep and the thought of what it would mean if he failed. The bird made the sound ravens make when they are annoyed that men are slow, and allowed itself to be caught as if it had agreed to the whole foolish business, but would not forgive being made to wait in it. The wax was black. The hand that had marked it had been steady. Tywin Lannister turned the slip between his fingers and let the weight of the seal press into the meat of his thumb, as if he needed pain to prove the thing was present. He broke the seal. He read. The room around him receded the way rooms do when a man's mind steps to the edge of a cliff and looks down on a view no map had prepared him for. He had thought, in a dozen idle moments and one or two sober ones, about his father's death. He had pictured it like the ending of a sentence that had gone on for pages. Full stop. Set down your quill. Nothing further until the next quillman begins with a capital. He had imagined what would be freed and what would be bound. He had not imagined this. A smear of ink where the words should be. A noise in the head like a crowded corridor. A relief that was not relief because the house had been held up by a girder he had not realized he himself leaned on as much as he resented it. He poured wine and spilled none. He sat down because standing was suddenly absurd. Varys watched him with his soft, unhelpful sympathy, the kind that made men want to confess to crimes they had not yet committed simply to have something to fill the space with. "A heavy thing," the eunuch said in his careful innocence. Tyrion smiled a strangled smile. "A thing of weight." "Certainly," he allowed. He read the letter again. It was succinct, as messages borne on corvid wings must be. Lord Tywin had suffered a grievous assault in his chamber at Harrenhal. He had died within the hour. Sir Kevin held command. The garrison was shut up and loyal. The host was under orders to make for the city with haste. The maester who had written had a hand that in other circumstances Tyrion would have admired. Dry, neat, no flourish, not a word more than he could spare. The seal bore not the Lannister lion but a plain strip of wax impressed with the link of the chain. It said, "This is the world. I am only the messenger. Do not try to make me more than that." "Does she know?" he asked, and Varys flicked a glance toward the tower where his sister kept a room like a stage for private dramas. "If she does not, she will soon," Varys said. "Ravens like to fly in flocks when the air is thick with news." Tyrion drank. "Tut." The wine was good. It tasted like nothing. "Tell me the things you will say later when we have time to measure our words," he said. "Say them now without the ribbons." Varys' mouth folded into a shape that wanted to be a purse for coin. "The hand that has held your enemies steady has been removed," he said. "They may fall. They may flail. A flailing enemy is an opportunity and a danger. Sir Kevin is no fool, but he is not your father. He will want to preserve. Your father relished the making." "And the Tyrells?" Tyrion asked. The word tasted like olives, a little bitter and briny. He had set Littlefinger to bait that hook, and Littlefinger had gone with his smiling lies and his sincere eyes. And no raven had yet told them if Mace Tyrell had taken the taste into his mouth and decided he liked it better than the aftertaste of Renly's ghost. Littlefinger will tell them what it profits him to tell, Varys said. He will draw pictures in the air and make the pack of lords think they are cards. Whether they will be seduced by the image of themselves as kingsmakers, without a kingmaker to look down his long nose at them. He let his hands open in a small, sorry blossom. Tywin Lannister's name in a mouth makes that mouth taste of iron. Your sister will find that iron wanting and will chew harder. She is already chewing, Tyrion said, and thought of his nephew on the wall of a city soon to be ringed by fire, shouting for heads because it entertained him, and because fear made him want to show his teeth. He thought of wildfire in the jars below ground, and of the Guild of Alchemists, with their long-remembered glory shining again in their eyes, not because of competence, but because the times had turned mad enough to resemble their dreams. We will hold, he heard himself say, using a voice he had only learned recently, the one that told men he was a part of the wall, rather than a man merely standing by it. We may, Varys allowed, which was as generous as he ever became. I will have little birds listen to the bridges and to the kitchens. The city speaks under its breath when it is frightened. Sometimes it says true things it would not dare say aloud. Doe, Tyrion said. When Varys had gone, he sat with the letter until the candle bent low and burned its own wax. He tried not to think of his father's hands, the way they had set a world to rights that Tyrion despised but lived in, the way a child lives in a house built by men he does not love because winter is outside and wants him. In the morning he would write 5 letters, one to Sir Kevan, one to the Tyrells, if they could be reached by any bird that could fly faster than fear, one to the smiths, one to the master of ships, who carried himself like a man whose water had been drawn for him, but could not be counted on to carry another's bucket when asked, and one to the queen that would say very little and make it sound like more. He would sleep in an hour's time with his boots on and his sword on the chest beside the bed, and his mind like a wheel that did not want to stop turning, because the cart it was attached to had begun to roll downhill. At Harrenhal, men moved as if their first movements had been seen and judged and found wanting. Sir Kevan ordered, and the orders took. He had the gift of not needing to prove that he was issuing them for himself, rather than for his dead brother. The body had been laid out and washed, not as carefully as a noble lady might have liked, but more carefully than a soldier would have thought necessary. The maester had closed the eyes. The old scribe, whose hand had been steady for 40 years, shivered and did not err. Adam Marbrand did what he always did, which was to look to the edges and make sure no one would come through them uninvited. The mountain of a man who had served Lord Tywin with a kind of joyless thoroughness was not there to be sent. He had been off breaking peasants to pieces in a way that made all other business seem tidy. Sir Amory Lorch prowled like a weasel searching for a chicken that would be foolish enough to be asleep in the wrong place. The brave companions laughed too loudly or not at all, and shifted their loyalties like men throwing cloaks over their arms when rain came. Kevan stood in the solar where his brother's blood had dried to a color like wine left too long. He kept his hands behind his back to stop himself from touching the table, as if he could set it right with his fingers. The bone weight lay weeping a dark rim where ink had soaked into it and dried. He considered the map with a soldier's impatience for paper when men were what you must move. He said the name he would not wish to say in front of the men. Tyget would have laughed, he said, and the scribe, not understanding, made a small apologetic sound and lowered his eyes. Kevan drew breath. We send him west. No burning in the Riverlands. He goes home in state. Adam, you will escort the bier as far as the Golden Tooth with 200 and a letter in your hand with my seal that no man in the west will deny. From there, the Rock's men will do their duty better than any of us could teach them. You will return as fast as your horses can carry you. Then, Adam bowed a bow that carried no cord in it, and yet had grace. And the rest, my lord. We move for King's Landing, Kevan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. We do not scatter. We do not allow free companies to decide that their contracts were with a man rather than a house. The men will be paid. Those who do not like their pay will be paid with lashes. Then thou, Vargo Hoat, someone began, and stopped when Kevan turned his head the way his brother had turned his head, not because he wanted men to fear him, but because it saved time. Vargo Hoat will be watched, Kevin said. If he objects to being watched, he will be shorter by one objecting part. The scribe's pen scratched at that as if it were an order to be posted. We do not make of this a thing larger than it is. We do not make of this a chaos in which enemies will find comfort. The boy in King's Landing is still king. We are still lions. We are not a herd. Men breathe out. Men breathe in again in unison, which is how armies live. They turned to their tasks. Kevin stood a moment longer, letting the memory of his brother's presence shape itself into something he could put aside without dropping. He had loved Tywin as deeply as he had had cause to hate him, and had done neither because the world had needed a man at Tywin's shoulder, who did not bring his own storms to the field. He looked at the place on the wall where a small panel had a line too straight to be part of old stone, and he filed the knowledge away under a word that did not enter into orders. Weasel. Find the girl, he said, practical again. The small one, the cupbearer. She may have seen something she did not understand was useful. Bring her to me if you find her. Do not break her in the finding. Men muttered and scattered, glad to have a task with edges. The maester came with his chain like a reluctant river round his neck, and asked questions with his eyes that Kevin did not answer with his mouth. He could not remember the last time he had allowed himself to think the word grief and mean it. He would drink with Adam when the beer had gone through the gate. He would drink once more when he reached the city. Then he would go on without it. Out in the camps, the rumor had turned into a shape that men could throw sticks at in their talk and pretend to wound. The free riders, whose loyalties were tied with knots they could untie, told each other that the lion's teeth were still sharp, even if the jaw had slackened. The foot, who did not get to have opinions, said nothing because opinions drew attention. Vargo Hoat's men sharpened their sabers and made jokes in their lisping cant about how sapphires could be stolen easier from bodies that did not move. The word weasel ran through it all, like a little river underground. Along the Red Fork, Roose Bolton received his letter later than he would have liked, and did not begrudge the Raven the hours it had had to fight wind and hawk to arrive. He read it with his usual attention to whether the ink had been made cheaply, and to what was not written. He sat with his gray eyes near the fire and counted men without moving his lips, not because he feared they would be read, but because the numbers themselves were more present when kept under the tongue. The leech on his arm plumped itself at his pulse. He flicked it without looking down. Lord Tywin is dead, he said to the air. Which is how he said things when he wanted to first hear how they sounded in a room with no one in it. Then, to his knight across the tent, he said, "Summon Sir Helman. Send for Lord Vargo Hoat. No. Send for Vargo Hoat's captain. Do not tempt the goat to mischief by making him think himself invited to my table." He smiled a small smile. "Harrenhal is a ghost that wants a master. We will oblige it." Brienne of Tarth knelt at a brook in the west and washed blood from her hands that was not her own and bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying, because the thing that had been worth crying for had already been done, and there was no point making words for it. Jaime Lannister, tethered and fuming, watched with the dark appetite of a man who is being remade against his will. News would find them like rain. They had only to exist, and eventually the world would wash over them. For now the iron bit was in one mouth, and the memory of a boy with golden hair whose head had been made for a crown was in another woman's mind like a thorn she had chosen to press her hand against over and over. At River Run, a raven came in on a wind that had crossed 50 miles of fields gone lean, and found Catelyn Stark in a hall that had grown cold even with fires stoked high. She read the letter standing. The wax stuck to her thumb and cooled there. She had thought, in the way a woman thinks things she does not put into words because words would betray the stupidity of them, that Tywin Lannister was like stone, always there, cruel and dependable in his cruelty, weathering into the same shape for years. To learn that such a stone could be cracked by a hand. What did that make of the world where her children walked? Her feelings were a map that changed its rivers overnight. She looked to her uncle, whose black fish on red had always looked like a joke and a warning at once. "Bad for them," Brynden said mildly. "Not all good for us. Nothing is all good for us." She said, and was surprised to hear her own voice as clear and dry as winter leaves. Robb is in the west, and the riverlands are ash. Tywin's death frees men to make mistakes. Men will oblige, the Blackfish said. He tapped the letter with a forefinger, considering its neat hand. If Kevin is wise, he rides east. If he is very wise, he rides in 2 ways at once. With the beer to the west, with the host to the city. It would be a neat trick. He is not his brother, but he knows how to stand near a man like that, and learn where to put his feet. We should expect him to do the expected well. Men know. What do we do? She asked, though she knew the answer. She wanted to hear it in another mouth to be sure it would not break when it came out of hers. We hold, he said. We pinch, here and there, to see where the fat yelps. We write to the phrase and treat them like a dog we are forced to pet. We do not let our young king come running home because his mother misses him. He smiled a smile that ached and was gone. We tell him that in such a game there are only a few moves you get to make for love. He has made one already, and we must live with it. She thought of Jaime Lannister at large, and of Brian's long stride, and of oaths sworn. She thought of her father's bones in a cart somewhere between here and the north, and of the smell the cart would have by the time it came to a gate. She folded the letter. She put it away on a table where the light made a neat rectangle on the wood. And if this brings the stag to the city sooner, she said, and Bryndon's eyes narrowed in pleasure. At the part of him that loved to be right about how men go wrong, then your wolf and their rose will be late to that dance, he said. It may be that the wine will be gone and the floor sticky by the time they arrive. Late arrivals step on toes. It is amusing to watch when one is not invited. Arya did not know any of that on the day she met the men who called themselves brothers. She only knew that the air under the trees by the old road was cooler by a degree than the air in the sun, and that Gendry had grown thoughtful in a way that made him look older, and that Hot Pie had started humming under his breath, a song about a rabbit that knew better than hunters but not better than dogs. She smelled men before she saw them. Leather, smoke, horse, onions. The yellow hood came out from behind a beech and made a little bow, as if there were a lady watching, and he were determined to make her laugh. You keep the sheep's ways, he said. Sensible. Sheep live and live. Wolves eat and get killed. Men with banners do both at once and tell themselves that makes them clever. No. Gendry had the look of a man about to put himself between something and someone. Arya stepped to one side of him and did not go behind. We're going north, she said, because sometimes the truth is the best disguise. We want no trouble. Good, the Yellow Hood said. My mother told me not to trouble girls with steel in their sleeves. He smiled down at her sleeve seam, where the work was neat enough that only a man who enjoyed seams would see it. Angui, does your mother say the same? Mine says don't trouble anyone who looks as if they mean to go where they say, said the wheat-haired man, and the other men behind them. 5, 7, 9 appeared out of leaf with a quiet that made Gendry's jaw set, and then loosen, because men who could move that softly in a forest could have moved more loudly if they had meant harm early. Where's north? Angie asked, mild as bread. Where the air smells like snow, Arya said. South smells like shit and onions. Said a big man in a lemon-colored cloak that had seen cleaner days. So you're going the right way. He pulled the cloak tighter around himself and peered at Gendry. You have the look of someone who knows an anvil, he said. We need nails nearly as much as we need arrows. We need bread nearly as much as we need nails. Hot Pie put in, because he could not help himself where bread was concerned. Bread we have, Lemon Cloak said, with the proprietary pride of a man who has found a sure thing in a world of uncertainties. Men with lords forget to pay for it. We remember. He squinted at Arya as if trying to read writing on a piece of parchment that had gotten wet. Where do you come from? From behind us, Arya said. She kept her voice flat. The Yellow Hood's smile widened, as if the answer made the world slightly more to his taste. Everyone is from somewhere behind, Angui said. Easy. We can see you across a bit. We've coin, and the inn has beer that tastes less like a dead frog than like a live one. We'll tax you a question apiece and let you go." "Fair. What if we don't like questions?" Gendry asked. "Then you can decide you like our beer less than you like our questions," the Yellow Hood said. "And we can decide we like your company enough to walk with you anyway, until the road chooses for us." Arya waited. They could refuse and run, and perhaps outrun men who knew the byways better than they did. Or they could walk where other feet had worn the ground and pretend to be what they could be for an afternoon. Children who were not being hunted by men, they had made into hunters. The coin in her palm pricked like a secret that wanted to be used and must not. She thought of the lake man with his red cap who had not wanted to be seen. These men wanted to be seen and then forgotten, which was a different craft. "We'll drink," she said. "One question apiece." She held up 3 fingers and then folded them one by one, as if making a bargain with the air. The inn at the Kneeling Man did not make a fuss for their return. It never made a fuss for anyone. Lem put gold on the board with relish and a wink. The fat keep took it as if it were copper sharpened on both sides. The room filled with heat and the low talk of men who wanted, for an hour, to be somewhere that did not care which way the next troop of riders would go. Engi told a story about a man who had tried to shoot a hare with a spear, and had put the spear through his own foot instead. Lem laughed too loudly and then softly, and the Yellow Hood crumbled bread and tossed it one piece at a time toward a mouse hole, as if to see whether courage or hunger would show first. "My question," the Yellow Hood said to Arya, and he said it with a politeness that made the inn's heir sit up and listen. "How long is the road you're on?" "As long as it has to be," she said. He looked delighted at the answer, as if she had chosen the piece he had wanted. "Mine," said Lem to Gendry. "You've arms like hammers and a face like you'll be hit by one if you scowl so. If we cut you open, would it be iron or will we find something soppy like a heart?" "Try it," Gendry said, and Lem's grin widened into something like respect. Engai turned to Hot Pie. "You then, can you make a crust hold its shape without a pie tin?" "Ow. No one can do it without a tin," Hot Pie said hotly, then flushed because he heard the challenge. "Unless they're very good," he added, and Engai laughed, not unkindly. "For your question," Arya said before anyone could put anything sharper than laughter between them. "How far do you walk before you count yourself home?" "Home is where a man can sleep without asking a question every time his dog moves," Lem said. "We haven't found it this week. Might next. Might never. We walk until something breaks that has been waiting to break." "Dan Setter. Do." "Something broke," the Yellow Hood said, and now he let the room lean in again just enough. "We are mending it, one arrow at a time." "We're not menders," Lem said. "We're breakers of a different sort. Everything that breaks mends something else," Angoi said. "Practice." They walked with Arya and Gendry and Hot Pie as far as the next stand of trees, and then the one after that. They told stories that had no pieces in them with names, but had the shape of truths about men and horses and weather. They listened when Arya spoke, not as if she were a girl, but as if she were a person whose words might turn the path a little this way or that. When they parted, the Yellow Hood pressed a small loaf into Hot Pie's hands and said, "No tin, mind you," and Hot Pie looked crestfallen and inspired at once. "Go your way, little Northers," Lem said, and put a big hand on Gendry's shoulder and squeezed once. Hard, the way men do when they mean to tell you they have seen you and approve of the seeing. "If you come on men who call themselves king's men and act like wolves, tell them Lem Lemoncloak says their mothers shouldn't have bothered." Arya raised a hand and did not say thank you. Thank you did not belong to them. It belonged to a woman with flour on her cheeks, who would give them a place by a fire and pretend not to know they were hungry. These men would not need her thanks. They would take it as payment, and that would be wrong. She put one foot in front of the other, and the trees took them back until the men behind were a story again. They came to a village where the houses had wattle and daub like honeycomb left too long, and the fence had been strengthened with sharpened stakes, and the women carried hoes like weapons instead of tools. A boy sat on the fence with his legs swinging, and when he saw them, he narrowed his eyes as if to say, "I am keeping count, and you are 3. Gendry set the water skin on a post and went to the well. Arya went to the edge of the green and stood. A man came out of a house with a net over his shoulder and looked at her as if she were a hawk that had come to sit on his barrel. "North," he said, as if testing whether the word tasted better in his mouth than south. "If you take the old King's Road, you'll find men who want to ask you who you are. If you take the byways, you'll find men who don't care and dogs that do. Choose what you like." "What do you choose?" Arya asked. "I choose to pull eels out of ditches and let lords fight over numbers," he said. "Eels never wrote me a letter telling me what to do." She smiled. Surprised. He did not. "He ate something," he said, as if making a concession to decency. "You look like you'd blow away in a strong word." He jerked his head at a woman who took 3 bowls and filled them with barley and chopped cabbage and set them on an upturned crate as if this were a normal part of a day and not charity. Hot Pie murmured to the bowl in the way he had when he was pleased with how food looked, as if it were a child he had recognized in a crowd. Arya ate without heat. Food was food. It filled the place where other things would come to ache if she let them. When the village had shrunk behind them to a shape that could have been any small settlement, a man on a gray horse fell in beside them with a quiet that said he had been practicing it since before Arya had learned to braid her hair. He wore no livery. He did not make show. His beard was more ideas than hair. He looked at Arya and did not look away the way most men did when they remembered that girls were not supposed to meet their eyes. "Harwin?" Arya blurted before the part of her that had learned not to say names could stop her. The man's mouth did a thing that might have been a flinch and might have been the opposite. "My lady," he said, and the words made a sound in her chest like a door opening onto a room that had been shut too long. "I thought it was you," he said, softer. "You walk like our Lord did when he was naming a thing inside his head. I ought to have seen sooner." Gendry tensed. Hot Pie whispered, "Who?" Because he was forever trying to catch up to the right name in a conversation that had started before he arrived. Harwin slid off the horse and set a knee in the dirt, as if the ground had asked him to be reasonable and bend, and he had chosen to be agreeable to the ground. "Don't kneel," Arya said sharply, because kneeling made danger, kneeling made visibility, kneeling said princess to men who would enjoy making you something else. "Then I won't," Harwin said, rising at once, a smile quick and apologetic and glad. "Will you come with me to men who will be gladder of you than any 3 fortunes? There are men who loved your father and would walk into the sea if you asked them. They have not had a thing worth walking toward that was theirs for some time." "And so, where?" Arya asked, though her body had already begun to be lighter in a place that had been heavy since she had taken ship from King's Landing in a cart. "Shadows," Harwin said, which could have been a joke and was mostly not. "Hollow Hill. The Lightning Lord is there when he is not somewhere else. Thoros will preach at you and then feed you. Lem will be rude and then give you his cloak if it rains." He glanced at Gendry, and something softened. "The world is mad, boy," he said. "Come where we have made a method of madness." "We can't go too slow," Arya said. "I mean to go north." "We'll turn you north," Harwin said, and put his hand over his heart. The way men do when they mean oath, and cannot make a better one. They followed him through scrub and gully, and into a fold of land so complete that unless you walked into it by the right crease, you would think it was only hill and scrub, and a great tree fallen long ago. Under the roots, the earth had been hollowed in a way that made the hair at the back of Arya's neck prickle with old magic and newer work. Men came up like badgers, cheerful and suspicious at once. They had made a hall of caverns. Firelight woke the old stone in strange ways. A woman with gray hair and one long braid pressed a trencher of stew into Arya's hands and patted her cheek before she could decide whether to allow it. "Beric!" Someone called, and then Thoros. And then Len ducked his head through a low passage, banging his shoulder with a curse that was almost affectionate. He saw Harwin, saw Arya, and let his face open in a way that could have been a grin and could have been the breaking of a mask. "7 bloody hells," he said softly. "The little wolf." Thoros of Mirror smelled of wine and smoke and something older when he came. His red robes were patched and oily. His hair was thinning. He took Arya's face in his hands as if measuring it for a memory, and kissed her forehead, as if she were a little girl being presented to a god she did not yet know if she believed in. "By all the false beards I've burned, Ed's girl," he said, and then wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and laughed at himself. The Lord has a trickster's humor today. Beric Dondarrion was not there. That was his way. He would come on a wind from the east or a trail from the west, like a man who had been walking in a story and had come out to take a breath. In his stead there was a feeling in the caverns as if a sword lay unsheathed somewhere not too far off, waiting for the right hand. They told her news in pieces, because that was how a heart can take it. They did not use the words she could not bear to hear without looking at the floor. Winterfell, Bran, Rickon. They told her of the Riverlands, of fords held and lost, of men with lion badges who took horses that had been put to seed a week ago, and bread meant for a christening. They told her the same rumor the world had told her twice already, that Lord Tywin Lannister had died an unnatural death at Harrenhal, and they watched her face not to pick a story out of it, but to see whether she would flinch as a rabbit flinches when a hawk's shadow passes. She kept her face like her father's, a thing that did not tell secrets without being asked on oath. "We did not do that," Lem said, as if she had accused them. "Would that we had." "We didn't," Angway said mildly, "because the truth is a habit. We were very busy making Sir Emery Lorch have a bad day elsewhere." Thoros poured wine and then water, and then wine into Arya's cup, making a drink that was more patience than intoxication. "And who else did not do it?" he asked, as if it were a joke, and the men laughed. The fire breathed. Somewhere in the maze a dog shook itself and then sighed. Thoros turned his cup in his hand and said softly, "There are hands that move when the gods have covered their eyes." "Gods don't have eyes," a boy near the fire muttered. And the men around him chuckled. Thoros raised his cup in admiration. "They have to have some defect," he said. "Else, why would they need us to do their errands?" Arya slept that night in a bed of dry fern that smelled like old suns. Hot Pie snored on one side of her, and on the other, a girl with dark hair named Willow with a knife in her boot, like a promise. Gendry took a turn at the entrance, leaning his shoulder against a root that had been polished by the backs of men for years. He hummed something that might have been a smith's chant turned into a lullaby. In the night, Beric came. She woke to the sound of men standing up the way men do when someone they love has come from farther away than the day would allow. He had the look of a man who had walked out of weather and chosen not to comment on it. His hair had gone paler since the last time Arya had seen him in King's Landing, when he had been a pretty lord sent to apprehend a mountain, as if mountains were things that would docilely be tethered. His eye patch sat neat. His mouth had a curve it had not had then. The kind of curve men get when the world has made a joke of them and they have decided to be in on it. He knelt to her without the ceremony that would have offended her, and took her hand. Not to press his mouth to it in mockery that would be affection, but to hold it and be held in turn. "My lady," he said, "you have found us. Forgive our poor hall." "Bye." "It is good," Arya said. She did not know why she wanted to tell him that very much. "It is better than good. It is a place where something different happens than out there." "Out there," he agreed. He seated himself by the fire and set his sword across his knees, and looked at the flames as if they were a book he had been reading and had lost his place in. "We have word of men moving like bees that have been struck. The West will send a bier, because the West is proud. The rest will go east, because pride has to live somewhere, and men prefer to feed it in cities. We will sting, and run, and sting again. We will choose which bees we are, and not be taught by them." End. "Stannis Baratheon has a fleet," Thoros said, throwing a twig into the fire that popped and made sparks like gnats. "Wildfire is distilled madness. Tyrion Lannister's mind is not distilled. It may be that the city burns and the sea boils, and the boy king cries out for a father who cannot come to him. It may be that the rose and the lion make a bouquet so strong men's stomachs turn. Either way, men will die, and here we will take those who come out of that tide and show them how to be men, without banners, who love something that is not a sigil." "Mandamash." "The girl will go north," Harwin said from the shadow. He did not say, "because I will take her." He did not ask permission. He stated a thing the way a blacksmith states that iron will bend if you heat it long enough. "She will," Beric agreed, and then looked at Arya because the thing had to become true in her mouth. Or it would not be true at all. "I will," she said. Saying it made heat behind her eyes. She rubbed at them with the heel of her hand and found the bruise on her wrist with her thumb, and pressed until pain took the place of water. "We'll go by paths without men who ask who we are. We will go where wolves go." "There is a road," Harwin said gently. "There is always a road." They left Hollow Hill at dawn. Men put bread in their hands and made jokes about the weather, and about what the weather does to men who think their banners will keep them dry. Thoros blessed them in a language that might have been the common tongue put through a fire and twisted into something almost more honest than itself. Beric put his hand on Arya's head in a gesture that, from another hand, would have made her want to cut him. From his, it felt like a door closing softly on a room where she could rest for 5 minutes in a war that had no beds. Lem grunted and put a lemon-colored scrap into Gendry's pack that turned out later to be half a hard cheese. Angui shot a leaf from a branch 3 times in a row and laughed at himself for missing by a finger's breadth. They went north. It was not a line. It was a shape that the land agreed to more often than not. It took them through copses where the ground sprang underfoot in a way that was dangerous for ankles and safe for walking without being heard. It took them along dry stream beds and over fences that had not been repaired because the men who would have repaired them had gone to follow one king or another for a season, and found themselves standing in a place where seasons had forgotten them. It took them to the place where the inn at the crossroads hulked like a fat old cat, licked its paw, and showed its teeth to anyone who thought to pull its tail. Arya stood across the road from it, with her mouth set and her hands in fists. "We don't need that one," Harwin said. And she heard memory in his voice, thick as stew, of a man with a hand over his mouth who had been required to speak lies he had not been born for, of a woman with hair the color of wheat when it had been caught in light and burned with it. They skirted it and slept in a hedgerow instead. It rained. Of course it rained. The world had been too clean for 3 days. The rain came in with the assurance of a thing that claims the right to do what it wants. The hedges turned to damp, patient things. The road ran away, leaving only a brown promise behind it. They sat under a thorn and let it drum on them and laughed more than was strictly necessary to keep their spirits from going down the ditch. "They'll be riding in this," Gendry said. "Some poor bastard will be cleaning the hooves after," Hot Pie said, who had once held a broom and now could not stop seeing the ways of work, where others saw only the show of men with iron. Arya watched the rain come off the hedge in small sheets. It made everything softer without making anything kinder. She found the coin in her pocket and turned it. The words that went with it sat behind her teeth like a pear you are not yet ready to bite. When she imagined saying them, she saw a ship and a city, and a set of faces that wanted to forget themselves. She put the coin away as if she could put away the part of her that might want that. North hummed. North was a song with only one note and infinite ways of playing it. When the rain stopped, they found a man and a boy under an elm with a wagon that had sunk to its axles. The man had a face like a smokehouse, lined with the memory of things preserved too long. The boy had a thinness to him that made Arya think of the old stories of trees that grew in bad soil, and then outlived men. Gendry set his shoulder to the wheel and made it move the first inch with a sound like a tooth being pulled. The boy stared as if witnessing a miracle. The man grunted. After a while, the wagon came free with a sucking noise that made Hot Pie gag. "You go north," the man said in a tone that indicated he would despise them whichever answer they gave. "Yes," Arya said. "Don't," he said. "They say a castle there burned once and never cooled down." He looked at her as if he had been asked whether to stop rain with a hand and had decided to answer truthfully anyway. "Here's the thing," he said, and reached back under the wagon seat to pull out a bundle. He gave her a pair of gloves that had seen better hands and had been mended with care. "Wear them. Your knuckles look like a child's but are getting to be a fighter's. No need to show everyone that at once." "Thank you," she said, feeling them like another skin. He waved a hand as if to tell her thanks were a luxury he did not have time for. They watched him jolt away through low water that had collected in dips and tried to become lake for an hour. Arya put the gloves on. It felt like making a decision she had already made twice. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister drank sweet wine that did not taste sweet and broke a cup by putting it down too hard. The shards looked like the points on her crown. She stared at them as if they could be made into something that would hurt someone else more easily. "He cannot be dead," she said to the empty room. "He cannot." The room, being empty and having no stake in her comfort, said nothing. Joffrey practiced with a crossbow in the yard and laughed when a bolt went wild and took a feather from a hen that had strayed into the wrong story. Sansa stood on a balcony and put her hands on stone warm from the day and thought of a winter garden where nothing would grow unless you coaxed it with patience and love. She had little of either left. Tyrion watched wildfire being poured with a care that would have impressed any master of wines, and wondered whether he was about to be the cleverest man in a city of fools, or the cleverest fool in a city about to teach everyone another lesson. Various little birds whispered in the spaces under staircases, and their whispers were collected and turned over and found to taste of fear and hope, and the kind of humor men make when they would otherwise weep. At Harrenhal, the beer went out under a gray sky, and the men who marched at its sides did not sing because singing implies there is joy somewhere to be found in this. And they had been taught the wrong songs for this funeral. Adam Marbrand's face looked as if it had been carved by a knife held by a man who did not like what he was making, but knew how to make it well. The gate shut behind them with the sound of a thing that has been closing for ages and has learned to enjoy it. Vargo Hoat licked his teeth and counted coins not yet in his hand. 2 nights later, a torch flared on the outer bailey where it should have been a lantern if men had been doing their duties. A cry went up and was smothered, the way pillow over face smothers breath. By dawn, the goat's men had changed cloaks and changed sides, not because they had found virtue, but because the wind had shifted, and they were men who had learned their trade by watching smoke. When Roose Bolton walked in as if he had ordered the place himself, Vargo presented him the keys on one knee and spoke of loyalties with his easy lisp. Roose smiled in a way that meant nothing then and everything later. "The weasel?" Roose asked, not for love of the story but because he liked a detail that might be turned in the hand like a gem for flaws. "Gone," he was told. "A ghost in the walls." He nodded as if to say, "So am I." Arya learned to sleep with one ear on the road. She learned to wake Gendry by touching his shoulder lightly and hot pie by whispering bread. She learned to move through copses leaving fewer signs than a fox. She learned how to take water from a stream without making a line that would tell men later where she had knelt. She learned to listen to Harwin when his silence grew heavy, because that meant he was about to make a choice for them, and wanted to include them in it without asking permission. They met a party of men in black one afternoon near sunset, men with hair cut in the way of the wall and faces that had learned not to expect kindness and were therefore surprised by it every time they found it. The black's hem was ragged on one man's cloak. Another had sewn a patch on his elbow with white thread that made a cross and then a star because he had run out of black. They had with them a boy with eyes like puddles, frozen over and cracked, and a man with a beard that had eaten his face and left the eyes bright as coins. "Recruiting?" Harwin asked, not unkindly. "Running," the man with the eaten face said frankly. "From fire and men with crowns and men without. Recruiting is what you call it when the thing you run from isn't as fast as you. This one says he wants the wall." He jerked his head at the boy, who did not move. "This one says he wants a hearth. This one says he wants a mother who isn't drunk. I say I want a skin of something that was once fruit." "Brotherhood," Lem said, and thumped his chest lightly. "We don't have fruit. We have onions. Onions is fruit if you cook it right," Hot Pie offered, with the certainty of a man who knows a thing others do not. The men in black laughed in the way men laugh when laughter keeps them from becoming weapons by accident. "North is that way," Harwin said, and pointed with his chin. "The wall is what it always was. High. If you're going to it, go to it. Dallying makes men into meat." The men went on. The boy with the puddle eyes looked back once at Arya, and then did not again. She did not call. She had enough boys in her head already whose names woke snakes in her thoughts when she spoke them. She watched them go until the black was a smudge, and then nothing. She thought of Jon Snow, and of what a wall does to a man who goes to it, wanting to be hardened. She did not know if she wanted that. She did not have to want. The world had put metal into her without being asked. She had learned to bend, not to break, and to break when bending was a lie. In a hamlet where all the chickens had learned to fly to the rafters, when men came up the path, Harwin stopped her with a hand on her arm. "A word," he said, and they stepped away from Gendry and Hot Pie, who were arguing about whether a crust could be made to crisp over a small fire if you did not have a pan. "They will come for you," Harwin said. He spoke as if making a report. "If the news has gone as far as it must have by now, some man will think you worth your weight in pardon. If they do, jump sideways. Do not go backward. Backward is to what you were. Sideways is to something they cannot predict." "I know," she said, and found that she did in the way of things that had been taught by fear and confirmed by courage. He looked at her with something like pity and something like pride. "You have learned too quickly," he said, and then, because it was the only comfort available, and he was a man who had learned to give comforts he could reach. "So did we." The days made a chain. The links were not all the same size. Some fit the hand neatly. Some bit. On the day when the sky burned yellow at the west, and the wind brought a stink like pitch and fish and men, they knew a battle had begun far away. They could not see it. They could not hear it. Their bodies reported it anyway, like horses that lift their heads at thunder and do not need to be taught what it means. Arya felt it in her teeth and in the bruise at her wrist, in the coin in her pocket that seemed heavier for an hour. Briefly, as if a city across the map had put its weight on the other end of a scale. That night Harwin woke from sleep as if a hand had been put over his mouth and took it away. He sat with his back to a stone and listened to the world moving like a thing in a cage, being made to dance. He thought of Ned Stark's long face and of the way the man had said please and thank you to men who had not learned those words and had respected him because he had not been joking when he said them. He looked at the girl and at the two boys and felt the old porch of Winterfell under his feet briefly. The feel of it like a family you remind yourself to have. He rubbed his hands together. He slept again without finding an answer to the question he was not yet ready to say aloud. When they reached a place that felt safe enough to stop, would he let her go? Would he be able? In King's Landing, men died with green fire on them that made even their enemies step back and cross themselves and whisper for gods that had never answered them to please change their minds this once. Stannis' fleet boiled. Men who had never seen the sea went to it to drown in it, as if it were a kind of justice. The Hound ran from fire like a man who had been told his name and hated it. Sansa prayed for anyone at all to live, and was surprised when some did. Tyrion swung an axe like a man who had told his arm a different story about itself, and the arm had believed him. At the end of the day, the roses came, their petals stained with lion blood, and the city screamed gratitude and fear in equal measure. The boy king preened like a magpie. The queen smiled and thought of debts and debtors, and made a list on the inside of her skin. Word reached the Riverlands days later, slackened and thickened by tells. Tywin Lannister was dead at Harrenhal. Tywin Lannister had saved the city with a ghost hand and a dead smile. Tywin Lannister had ridden at the head of a host made of nothing but gold and smashed a stag like a plate. The truth was Kevan had ridden, and Mace Tyrell had wanted to be seen and had been. Littlefinger had come back with his pockets full of favors and his hands as clean as any man's who had been playing in the mud. Tyrion had been cut. The king had named men heroes who had merely not died when he was watching. The city had not burned to the ground. The argument about whether it ought to have would be conducted by men who had been nowhere near it. For Arya, the war was a wind in the hedges. It made things bend. It tore at the leaves and left them on the road to be ground into noise underfoot. She put one foot in front of the other and began to understand, in her bones weaned on kitchen smoke and river fog and the breath of wolves, that the world would keep making itself with or without her, but that she had put her hand to it at least once and had felt it give. She did not know if there would be a second time. She did not plan for it. She made choices that were small and hard and true. When a farmer's wife asked her if she could card wool, She told the truth and then learned. When a ferryman said he would take them across if they would sing, she sang the only song that made sense and did not apologize that she could not carry a tune. Hot Pie carried it for her. When a man with one hand said that north was a grave and south a furnace, she said, "I have family in the grave," and watched his face as he tried to make that into a joke that would not hurt him if he said it aloud. He failed and was kinder for failing. They came at last to a place where the land tasted like old snow, even though the sun lay kindly on their shoulders. The trees had a different posture, as if they were older brothers watching a younger one's game and not deigning to join. Harwin stopped and put his hand on a trunk, and Arya thought he might be trying to borrow some patience from it. 2 days, he said. 3, if we are careful. If the gods like us, too. Do they? Hot Pie asked, wiping his face with his sleeve. Like us. They like jokes, Harwin said. We are a joke. They're fond. That night, Arya stood under a sky that had opened its cold eye and taken a good look at her. The coin in her hand felt like any other piece of metal now. The story it contained had settled. The bruise at her wrist had gone yellow at the edges. It would soon be only a memory that might be called a lesson if asked in the right tone. She said no names. The ones that had mattered most had been answered, and the ones that still mattered would be answered in their own time or not at all. Somewhere beyond the dark line of the north, a weirwood kept its own counsel and did not speak. In the morning she would walk again. She would stop when wolves stopped. She would eat when they did, and drink when they did, and learn what they dared to drink and what they refused. She would find the river's right branch and the ford that men had not yet torn apart. She would stand on a hill and see a shape she recognized, not with her eyes first, but with her skin. She could feel it already as a coming quiet, like the moment before a word you have wanted to hear for a year is spoken in your own language. On the other side of the world, or as far as it felt, in rooms where men measured a boy's future by the thread at his cuff and the set of his jaw when he was forced to choose between cruelty and weakness. People said Lord Tywin Lannister's name as if saying it would make them safe. They were right about some things and wrong about others. The future would not consult them. It rarely does. It would ask other people instead, small and quick and not worth a banner, to make decisions with knives and with kindness and with turning away when they wanted to look. It would ask a girl with a glove that did not fit to keep walking. She did.